government and the team that's been put together to organise the upcoming national convention as part of the national dialogue process insists the first gathering will go ahead this coming weekend. Let's speak now about the preparations with the member of the Convention Organising Committee, Mandisa Khanyile. Mandisa, good to have you on the SABC. So there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of back and forth regarding the dialogue process, its cost, who will be a part of it, etc. Is it not all turning into more trouble than it's worth?
Absolutely not. I mean, lots of things happen, there's bumps in the road, but I don't think it's more trouble than it's worth. I think there's also how can I put it? We're forgetting that this is supposed to be a citizen-led process, right? So the bulk of the dialogues that are going to be taking place are going to be run and led by the citizens of this country. The narrative around this being a government process, out of 50, 60,000 estimated dialogues that are going to be taking place around the country, only 13,000 are going to be funded by this budget and are going to be sort of like convened by members of the state. So the rest are going to be led by your taxi association, your stokvel, your churches, your community organizers, your NPOs and other organizations, as well as private individuals, around issues that interest them, around issues that affects them directly.
Would they ultimately then have to fund discussions around their issues of interest?
It doesn't cost money to talk to one another. If you are already meeting at church on Sunday, what does it cost you money to sit down and spend an extra 30 minutes having a conversation around the issues in the area where your church is based? It's the idea that we have created a scenario where we have to have catered events in order to have conversations doesn't make sense. That's not who we are as a nation. You don't need buses in order to have a conversation. You don't need to have catering companies. We don't need to release a tender so that there are 50 people that eat. People are already meeting. Mm-hmm. A stokvel meets every Sunday. They already had a plan around what they were going to eat. So documenting that conversation and inputting it on a platform, which then gets fed into a national conversation, is the ask. That's where the ask begins and ends.
And just on that ask, how do you then begin to make it a useful process, one where at the end of it, there's enough to take from and then ultimately reach what would be, I don't want to say a common goal, but shall we say what comes up predominantly as the direction the people in the multiple communities and other settings would want to take? Because even if we're meeting at a church, for example, inclusivity then becomes key, because we know even in the communities, not everyone necessarily wants to meet under the same structures or is comfortable in the same places. Do you get what I mean?
I absolutely get you around the issues of inclusivity, and that's why even those spaces can be created. For example, if we are an LGBTQ cohort within the church, we could have our own dialogue where we might feel a little bit more comfortable having that conversation amongst ourselves. The limitations are not there. What we're going to do, and what we've already started doing as the planning committee, is assisting in drafting a toolkit for facilitation of these dialogues. And that's going to be openly accessible to the public. They'll be able to access that through the dialogue website. And when they are done with the toolkit and have had their conversations, they're going to have a set form that they're going to be using in order to input that into the system so that we can be able to catalog it. Because of course, if it's just random, it's going to be difficult for us to be able to do so. So the toolkit is currently being developed. The convention is going to be signing off on that toolkit, and then it's going to be released out into society so that they can use it for their conversations.
You would then need, am I right, a team to oversee that these multiple or thousands of meetings, in fact, that you anticipate would be held. Who then takes care of, let's say, the people tasked with overseeing each of these meetings and making sure especially that what is presented ultimately, let's say, as the view of people in Ward 20 in Mangaung is actually actual input from them and not just a set of decisions taken by a few?
We envisage that there's going to be an ops center that's going to be obviously led by the Secretariat that sits at NEDLAC. Now, there's currently a structure in place that has been proposed. There's going to be an interministerial committee that's going to be dealing with the rapid response side on government's end. There's going to be a steering committee that's going to be elected this weekend that we're coming into at the convening. And that's going to be civil society partners, individuals, etc., that gets elected into those positions that are going to be running the process. As I said, the Secretariat then sits at NEDLAC. We also then have the Eminent Persons Group that is providing overall advisory services to the National Dialogue team. So those are the 4 teams that are sort of leading this process and shall be doing so over the next 12 months as we engage in these conversations between August of this year and April of next year, leading into the second national convention that's going to take all of these conversations and turn them into a social compact that the entire country would have signed up to.
On the issue of cost, Mandisa, ultimately, yes, as you said, it does not need to be thousands of meetings with catering and expensive paid-for venue, etc. But ultimately, at this stage, no one wants to pin down an exact cost, right? We're working with a ballpark figure. Why is it difficult to say this is how much it will cost? I know the 700 million rand has been disputed, but why can't we get an exact number at this stage, especially when you know what you intend to pay for and what you won't be paying for?
Firstly, the National Convention actually needs to first decide that the roadmap that we have guided them towards is what they want to do. If they decide that they don't want the roadmap, then the costs will change. So this is why we haven't pinned down a budget figure. For example, as recent as last week, the idea around having a social media dialogue space where young people are able to actually dialogue completely online and they don't have to have physical meetings, and we then enable that through a online app tool. That does have a cost implication. However, the convention needs to first decide, are they going to be implementing the roadmap that we've given them? Yes, that roadmap does have a budget allocation and amounts given to line items, but they haven't been endorsed. We are an interim structure. We're an interim structure, and we do not have the capacity to be able to say that this is the finalized budget until we have a gathering that can be able to endorse and say, these are the line items that need to be paid for, and therefore, as a result, the budget is now 800 million.
How conscious are you as a
I'm
structure?
not giving that as a trick.
Yes, how conscious are you as a structure, interim as you may be, of the fact that ultimately you should not, or should at least try to avoid becoming the beginning of a process that ultimately results in one that is viewed by the public, or even quite materially, as one where millions of funds, especially from the public purse, were spent on something that's brought nothing that the country can build on?
We definitely want to ensure that mechanisms are put in place for the implementation of the resolutions, or else you are right, it would be a waste of money. If this is just a talk shop like every other talk shop that ends in nothing, then yes, we would have had a wasteful expenditure exercise. We need to now use this convention and the next couple of months to ensure that the end product that we produce in June next year after the second convening is definitely, it has accountability built into it, and has an implementation a roadmap around exactly how do we ensure that when Ward 11 sat and said that they don't have water and they're going to build their own boreholes, how do we ensure that we make sure that that takes place and we use the right tools in order to do so?
So all in all, it'll be what happens on Friday that determines how much you yourselves as an interim structure, the organising committee, and us, the public, find out in terms of how this process will actually work. So more unknowns than what is known still, even for yourselves.
What we've done is we've just basically given the bones of what the national dialogue should be. We have drafted documents around what the roadmap should look like. What's going to be happening over the 2-day program is that they're going to be sitting down and looking at those documents, endorsing those documents, adding to those documents, and ensuring that we have an endorsed plan around what's going to be happening over the next 12 months. We will probably, this new steering committee would then be in a position to release to the public the actual roadmap, the actual budget, how we're going to go about doing this, and of course, again, the accountability mechanisms to ensure implementation once we are done.
Mandisa Khanyile, we'll see you on Friday, I guess. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Member of the Convention Organising Committee on the conventions around the national dialogue, the preparations thereof.